Hi, Alan here with our usual Monday night class on discovering Buddhism. Thanks for being there. We have nobody actually in the room at the moment, so I'll be able to direct my focus to people out there in streaming land. Hope you're warm. It's very freezing cold here in Sydney. So this is the third class on emptiness, wisdom realizing emptiness. And as always, let's start with some meditation on the breath, mindfulness meditation, to calm ourselves and get in our right frame of mind, set the motivation for the coming class. So get comfortable, sitting, lying, whatever's most relaxing for you. Okay, so let's start with checking on what's going on in our internal world. First of all, we just check our motivation, our state of mind. First of all, just starting with our sense of gratitude, how amazing, how fortunate we are to be able to do some practice, come together to study the Dharma, the incredible Buddhist teachings now available in the West. Feel that we're leaving the day's business, the day's busyness outside the room, letting go that sense of having to do, having to be, rushing and pushing and striving and driving. Now we can just take our time, spend some time looking after the mind, taking care of the mind. Our motivation is always the motivation Mahayana Buddhism, which is to develop our mind for the benefit of others. Develop our mind means to eliminate all ignorance or stains, develop great compassion for all beings, becoming a fully enlightened being, just like the Buddha. And then we can lead other beings to enlightenment. We can be of maximum benefit to other beings. That's our motive in studying the Dharma, doing the practice. Now coming into our body, just making sure we're comfortably seated or lying down, checking our posture, back should be straight, evenly balanced, shoulders relaxed. Eyes can be closed or just gently open, gazing at a body length ahead. Making sure we're relaxing and feeling the weight of the body on the surface we're on, the gentle pull of gravity into the earth, allowing ourselves to be held by the earth, just letting go physically, letting all the tension in the body disappear. Using the out breath to let go of all physical holding on and all the mental busyness, we breathe that out with each out breath. And And then becoming more aware of how the breath is constantly entering and leaving the body. Always has been, but now we're just noticing it fully. Breath is always the correct breath, nothing to judge, nothing to change. All we do is just watch, step aside and watch the movement of the body with the breath. Staying with the breath. Also, part of the mind is watching us watching the breath. What introspection, checking what we're doing. On the lookout for the wandering mind, and the mind leaves the object, which is our breath, distracted by thoughts, sounds. When we notice that's happening, we just relax, glad we noticed, gently release that distraction, and patiently come back to the breath. There will always be thoughts, but we don't follow them. We let them go. Just one breath at a time, the full flow of the in-breath and the full flow of the out-breath. Stay with the breath. Okay, it's just relaxing. Maybe have a refreshment. So hopefully you received the notes today for today's class, and there's also another document which was basically the Heart Sutra, which I'll talk about in a minute when we get to the questions. It's just a reminder that if anyone's watching who's new and you'd like to join the group and receive the notes every week, best way is to just, like in the live chat column, just put your name and email address, and I'll add you to the list, the mailing list, so you can be in the loop and get the notes. So next week's the last class on wisdom, realizing emptiness, and the subject after that is Tantra, Introduction to Tantra. So let's have a look at the questions. Last week we were just basically looking at the idea of using impermanence, the subject of impermanence, and looking at what that means to help develop some sort of grounding to study the philosophy of emptiness, or not just the philosophy, but the practice of emptiness. And of course, emptiness is, we're looking at how things exist in the external world, and how things exist in our internal world, particularly ourself. And we're told in the Buddha's teachings, in Buddha's second turning of the wheel, that basically our natural state of mind before we do any practice with the mind is that we're misconstruing how things exist in the world. We see things as being very concrete, existing out there on their own side, like something solid, concrete, and we see ourselves as something very solid and concrete. So like this duality of us here, the outside world there. And the Buddhist teachings say this is completely wrong. There's actually nothing that exists from its own side. That means having independent existence. So this is not just a philosophical point, but it's the cause of all our negative emotions, our tendency to look after ourselves rather than others. It's what they call self-cherishing, and it also keeps us in what they call samsara, the cycle of birth and death. So it's necessary for us to, if we want to escape all our suffering and become liberated, just as the Buddha did, we're going to have to study wisdom, how things exist, which is called the wisdom side of the Buddhist teaching, and we combine that with the other side of the teaching, which is compassion. That's wisdom and compassion are the two wings of the bird to liberation. So those two sets of teachings. So let's have a look now at the first question. What is the name of the very famous teachings on emptiness, and very short? So this is an easy one. I've already given you the handout today. I sent it to Heart Sutra. So the Heart Sutra is one of the teachings on emptiness that Buddha gave, and it's actually one of the most, probably the most famous because it's the shortest and most concise. Just fits on one page, as you can see. So the Heart Sutra is the short name for it. Full name is the Heart or the Perfection of Wisdom Sutra. In Sanskrit, it's the Prajna Paramita Sutra. Prajna Paramita Sutra there. So, but the handout you've got is actually more than that. The handout's 4 pages. And so it's actually got a practice that goes with reciting the Heart Sutra. So that's been provided by the people who've developed the Discovering Buddhism course. Thought this would be a good thing for the students to have. So the Heart Sutra is on page 3, and then there are these practices: taking refuge, and praise to Manjushri. Manjushri is the embodiment of wisdom, one of the aspect of the Buddha that embodies wisdom. The aspect of Buddha that embodies compassion is Chenrezig, also called Avalokiteshvara. And since we're studying wisdom realizing emptiness, the wisdom side of teaching, they've got a prayer to Manjushri. Manjushri has 2 forms. The peaceful form is Manjushri. So you might have seen pictures of Manjushri sitting down and holding a sword. The sword is wisdom, which cuts through ignorance. The other aspect of Manjushri is Yamantaka. So that's the wrathful version. So the ones you see most commonly is Manjushri, but they're both just aspects of Manjushri, Yamantaka, Manjushri Santra, Amarapatsanadi, or Lama Tsongkhapa, whose teachings we support and who is the founder of the Gelugpa sect of Tibetan Buddhism, the one that this center is based on, the Gelugpa sect. His Holiness the Dalai Lama is head of the Gelugpa sect. So we follow the teachings of Lama Tsongkhapa and also other Tibetan teachers and scholars from the other sects. We're not sectarian, but the Lama Tsongkhapa's teaching is the one that the Gelugpas tend to look at. And Lama Tsongkhapa was regarded as the embodiment of Manjushri, like a human form of Manjushri. And so he became, after a lifetime of practice, was regarded as having achieved Buddhahood in his life, and was able to communicate with Manjushri. Buddha was able to communicate with Manjushri, Buddha of wisdom. And so he wrote these wonderful texts, the Lamrim Chenmo, which embodies all the basic Buddhist teaching. And that's the Lamrim is really the foundation of the Discovering Buddhism course. Okay, so there's the Heart of the Wisdom Sutra there on page 3. And that's, if you're attending a center and a teacher having teachings by a Tibetan monk or a Western monk or Western high teacher, often they start the teachings with reciting the Heart Sutra, the Perfection of Wisdom Sutra, as a group. And that helps to clear obstacles because it's came from Manjushri's wisdom. It's very good for clearing the mind and preparing the mind for understanding teachings and sharpens the mind. Okay, so that's the long answer to the first question. What's the most famous short teaching on emptiness given by Buddha? It's the Heart Sutra, Perfection of Wisdom Sutra. What's the second question? What's the eternalist view of the self and the nihilist view? Compare this to the Buddhist Prasangika Madhyamika view. So remember last week, and I think probably the week before, just mentioned that when we're studying wisdom teachings, two things to avoid. Teachings as being, part of that there is indestructible soul. So that's rejected in Buddhism. So that's the eternalist view. We don't accept that there is this unchanging self. There is a self, but it's not existing in that way. And the nihilist view is where you throw the baby out of the bathwater and say, oh, well, if there's no concrete eternal self, then there can't be anything. Self doesn't exist. And so that's nihilism, nothingness. Nihilism. So both of those views are said to be wrong. So the Buddhist, the Mahayana view, Tibetan Buddhist, is called the Prasangita Madhyamika view. So it's the middle, sometimes called the middle school or the middle way, where we say, or the Buddhist teaching is a self, but the self is something that exists just by causes and conditions. It's not something that is unchanging and mutable and solid essence. It's just like a label. It's called a relative self or a conventional self. There is something here, but it's not what we instinctively feel it is. Instinctively, we feel that there is something more than just a label to help us, gives us a sense of holding, something to hold on to. So our natural tendency is wanting to attach to something, to feel that we have some more security. So when we're studying Buddhist teachings, we need to let go. This is the idea of enunciation of non-attachment. Attachment is said to be one of our greatest obstacles. So let's. We'll come back to that middle way view later in our talk tonight, and the I could be in a happy mood while the mind is depressed. Remember, the I in this independent. If it were independent, it could exist separately from the aggregates. The aggregates means our physical body and all our mental compositions, our different mental elements. So he says, if the I was something on top of that, elements. So he says, if the I was something on top of that, then the I could be in a happy mood or sad mood, or the mind could be depressed or happy. The mind could be in a different state. Obviously, not what happens. So there's, we come back to this when we look at the next Chandrakirti's 7-point reasoning on selflessness. Okay, so just that's enough for those questions, I think. Next week, I will send you out the questions that were given as part of this module. We have covered them, most of them, I think, in our earlier question and answers, previous 2 weeks. And I'll give you, because we're studying remotely, I'll give you the answers as well for next week. That's the last class next week. So the next item on the agenda is this Chandrakirti's 7-point reasoning on selflessness. So this is Lama Tsongkhapa main meditation on emptiness practice. Lama Tsongkhapa's main meditation. So what it is just a series of points, and it's actually looking at how external things and ourself can't exist in these 7 different ways. So they're looking at 7 possibilities of how things could exist, and they're saying, well, no, they can't exist like that because of whatever reason. So they use if you've got the books in the references, Ishitashi Sering's book on emptiness, page 95, and Yangtze Rinpoche's book on the Lamrim, teachings on the Lamrim. So they take the example of a car or an object, how that car exists, and then they apply it to the self. So we're looking at external object, and then we're looking at an internal object, which is how we regard the self, how we regard ourselves existing. So remember, the background of this is that nothing, according to the Buddhist philosophy, exists independently from its own side, inherently. So Lama Tsongkhapa suggests that we use something that we're attached to. We usually attach to ourselves, that's one thing. But he uses actually this is not Lama Tsongkhapa with the car, because obviously they didn't exist. This is Yangtze Rinpoche's example. So he says it helps this logical analysis, this practice, if we use something that we're attached to. I'll give an example of a car. Just if you're not attached to a car, it doesn't matter. You can just imagine you are. So looking at the first point, is the car just a collection of its parts? So how does this car exist? So the first thing, is the car just a number of parts, the collection of parts? So that's what probably instinctively we think, well, of course, the car is a collection of parts. It's the steering wheel, it's the engine, it's the upholstery, it's the paint, and all those bits and pieces come together, which we call a car. So that's what the car is. So if that's using this logic of Lama Tsongkhapa, if the car and the parts are the same, then each part would be the car. But the car and the parts are not the same. Okay, the car is one. So the part, we say, oh, there's one car there. But if you say, well, yes, there's one car there, but it's all, yes, there's one car there, but it's all it is a collection of parts. But the parts would also have to be one, logically. Now we know that the parts are multiple. There's innumerable parts that make the car. So obviously the car and the parts are related, but they're not the same. So that's the whole point of the first principle, of the first argument, car. So similarly, applying this to the self, is the self just a collection of parts? Now, in previous classes, we've looked at what Buddhist philosophy calls the aggregates. What makes up us? What makes up our self? And it's said to be these 5 aggregates. The first one is the body. Can't disagree with that. We have a body that's physical, and then the other 4 are different types of mental factors. The factor that we can discriminate between one thing and another. So these 4, without going into each of the details, there's 4 different types of mental aspects of the mind. So there's the mind, 4 aspects of the mind, and there's the body. And on top of that, we say that's Alan, or that's that person. So if we use this same reasoning that the self is just a collection, so separately means they have to be intrinsically different. So we know that the car cannot exist without the parts, so they're not separate. So this is the opposite extreme to the first proposition, that the car is just the parts. So if we can't say the car is separate from the parts, then we've got a problem as well, because they're obviously related, and there's not a total distinction. Car cannot exist without the parts. So same with the self. If it was separate from the aggregates, then the aggregates could be experiencing pain and pleasure, but the self would not. And exactly the same point that question 3 that we just looked at, if the I were independent, the self is independent, then from the aggregates, then the self could be in one room and the aggregates could be in another room differently. I could be sitting here, and then myself could be in the room next door. Okay, so that means, because they've got to be separate. Separate means separate. They can't be the same thing. Separate means separate. They It can't be the same thing. So that's two, means that that's not the way the car exists or the self exists. Three, do the parts of the car exist intrinsically on the base of the car? So we looked at this idea of something existing on a base, a collection, last week and the week before. I used the example of a collection, $1 being a collection of 5 20-cent pieces. Okay, we have a stack of 5 20-cent pieces, and we label that $1. That's conventional, that's true. So that's the 5 20-cent pieces like the base on which we label $1. So this one, do the parts of the car, sorry, there's a misprint. Do the parts of the car, there should be, just cross out that extra do, atoms. It could be plastic or leather or whatever it is. But each of the components of the car itself has parts. And those parts, those atoms, have subatomic molecules, like protons and neutrons, etc. Not molecules, but subatomic parts. And then we know that from modern quantum physics, those parts can be broken down as well. And there's no building block there. There's no building block. That's what quantum physics has discovered. There's no building block. That's what quantum physics has discovered. So nothing existing from its own side in the physical world. So similarly, the parts of the car have nothing existing from its own side. And so the base of the car, which is the parts on which we label car, has nothing existing from its own side. Similarly, the self, the aggregates, physical and mental, there, if we look at the body, that's composed of parts. We did our meditation on the body on impermanence last week. It consists of organs, molecules, and it's changing. There's always chemical reactions going on. Cells are aging and dying and so on. But there's no intrinsic self-existing body. And we also know from the mind that the mind has different moods. It has, if we just spend 5 minutes meditating, watching the mind, we can see how it's changing moment by moment. Different memory. The mind is very busy usually when we start watching it, like a traffic jam. So there's no sort of, I am meditating. This distinguishes the I from the aggregates that are meditating. So it seems to make sense to say that I am meditating, but we're not saying that the I and the aggregates are the same. Is put there because if this is the argument refuting point 6, actually the car and the parts assembled in a certain way are the same. The car is not its shape. So when the parts are put together, is that the shape of the car? So is the shape of the parts the same as the shape of the car? Each part has its own shape. So they've look at the parts the same as the shape of the car. Each part has its own shape. So if you say that the shape of the car and the parts are the same, you'd have to say that each part somehow miraculously changed when they were assembled into the car to actually have a different shape. You can see the logic. This is using the logic of reasoning to refute this. So if we successfully argue these points, we can conclude that there is nothing inherently existing as the car, which is the whole point of the exercise. We can't find anything, not a single atom, as Lamsa would say, existing from its own side. It's not dependent on cause and condition or part. That is the car. And similarly, if this applies to the external object of the car, we can use the same reasoning, that there is nothing intrinsically on top of our 5 aggregates which are all themselves composed of parts and causes and conditions, the body, the mental factors. There's nothing there on top of that is separate, existing from its own side. All right, so there it is. That's if you want to see the arguments in more full form, the best place is Yangtze Rinpoche's textbook or book on Practicing the Path. Is the name of the book, Practicing the Path. So I thought I'd put it there because it's actually the most, as I said, the one that's most commonly associated with Lama Tsongkhapa's teachings on emptiness. So the next point, I've just got a note about Lama Tsongkhapa's use of these two terms, space-like emptiness and illusion-like emptiness. So space-like emptiness, Lama Tsongkhapa says, is experiences when a high meditator who's meditating using single point of concentration, that means he's meditative equipoise, it's called. A high meditator can rest his mind on a single object for a long period of time, and if he's mastered the art of single point of concentration, the great meditators can rest their mind for as long as they like on a single object. So if that meditator in meditation rests his mind on how the self, how the I exists, how the meditator exists, the self, then that's called, and successfully penetrates using insight. So that's called vipassana in Sanskrit, using vipassana to penetrate how the self exists, the I exists, then that's called space-like emptiness. So if he's able to do that while he's in session, like sitting on the cushion, then he's obviously achieved a very high level realization. But unless he's reached Buddhahood, when he's out of the session, he loses that space-like emptiness. And when he's doing between sessions, he's experiencing some awareness of wisdom, and that's called illusion-like emptiness. So the example is when he's not sitting on the cushion in single point of concentration, he's looking at how the outside world exists. So if he's walking, he can see that it looks like these physical self-existence from its own side. That is the duality, that he exists here and the outside world exists there. But he knows, because of his practice in sitting meditation, space-like emptiness, he can see, he doesn't believe it. Okay? Just like if we know about mirages when we're driving on the road, it's a hot day, we see these shimmering pools of water that look just like water on the road. But because we have knowledge of these illusions, we know that that's caused by the heat, various physical factors in the environment. And so we don't believe that there is water there correctly. So similarly, the meditator who can experience emptiness in meditative equipoise can see that things appear dualistically, as if they exist from their own side, between sessions when he's going about normal business, but he doesn't. He has that experience, rejects the idea of a creator, where the idea of a creator in Christian tradition, that the universe was created by God. So this is rejected because all phenomena using dependent arising have to arise from causes and conditions. So the in Buddhist cosmology, and the Dalai Lama himself has accepted that the Big Bang Theory is correct. And that years ago, a billion years ago, and So that cause is the cause of the universe we see today, expanding, and the cause of all our molecules and atoms. So it's a new policy. The government has just passed the budget. But we often use these generic terms, talking about an entity that we label. The society. Society is too materialistic. Our community, another term or label that we use. And sometimes, if we're just using these generic terms without too much thought, we forget that the government, the society, the community consists of individuals. If there's no individuals, there's no members of the government, then there's no government. So that point there about parts is that often we just see an entity and forget that there are compositions there. And the same with, the chair or the vase or whatever. Third one is that we also incorrectly assign labels to an object as if the labels reside naturally within the object. So when we say somebody is a very boring person, so it's just like this, just like that, we're actually using the label, and we think that there is actually an inherently existing boring person there. Whereas we see the human being who we know and think of as boring, and the label goes on before we even realise that it's just our view, our glasses, our metaphorical glasses that are seeing that person in a certain way. Similarly, coming back to the example of the 5 20-cent pieces labelled as $1, more concrete example, the label is the dollar. But we actually think, oh, that's definitely $1. That is $1. But actually, these parts, the 20-cent pieces, and the label is on top of that. So it's just a label on top of some base. It has to be a valid base, which are the 20-cent coins. We can't just call it a collection of rocks, $1. So you have the valid base, which is there, the 20-cent pieces, and on top of that, we label $1. Okay? But that's a label, $1, not the 20. Different. The label is different from the 5 20-cent piece. So these, those projections where we forget about causes, we forget about parts, we forget about labels, are all false. So the king of reason, dependent arising, is asking us to look at how these things exist independent, not as independent entities, but depending on causes or parts or labels. So going just a little bit deeper, coming back to cause and effect. So looking that that object depends on cause and effect. So the most common, this is looking at external objects. A common example is the tree, an oak tree. And what the tree, if we just say, oh, there's definitely an oak tree existing from its own side. So using the cause and effect analysis of dependent arising, we say the tree is only there because there is a seed, an acorn, and that seed was provided, that's the primary cause. That seed was put in a certain circumstances, conditions with water, warm, heat, light, and so on. And so that seed changed into, the seed of the cord, changed into the oak tree. The cause is not the same as the effect. The seed is not the same as the oak tree, but they're interrelated, cause and effect. So the second way of using dependent arising is to look at the parts. So I think for me the most profound example is holding up 2 fingers like that. One's longer than the other. Okay? So if we analyze, one is only longer than the other because there are two things there. It's relativity. Okay, if we just have one finger, we can't say that's a short finger. It's only short when we relate it to the longer finger. So this is one very obvious example. And so we can use other examples such as there and here and there. So if you think about it, there's only over there, from my point of view, if I'm here. The person who's over there is here, and they're looking at me and I'm there. Again, the label here and there is dependent on the viewer, the circumstances of the viewer. And just looking at examples there, fire depends on fuel, okay? So there may be smoke, and we say, oh, there's fire there. But actually, the smoke is just an indicator of the cause of the smoke, which is the fire, and the fire is coming from different causes. There's enough heat to ignite the wood, whatever it is. And so we have the fire being dependent on those causal conditions. And table, similarly. The table is dependent on the four legs, and the surface. They often use the example of table, they often use the example of vase. So there's no inherently existing table. There are the parts, just like the car in the early example, 237-point reason. And these parts, when they're assembled in a certain way, and we call that a table. So it's not the same as the parts. It's related to, but not the same as. Last point, designations or imputations. So this is the one using the label. And if you look closely what's going on with the label, there's three things. There's the basis of imputation, so that's the valid base, the 5 coins of the one making up $1. That's the base. There's the imputed label, which we call $1, and then there's the mind that's behind that, the mind that has done the imputing. The three things: object, basis, label, mind, subject. So these all are acting interdependently, and this is, if we have all these things present, we call that the car or the table or that person. That's Joe Blow, because we've got the basis, Joe Blow, we've got the label, and we've got our mind putting the label on. So all this is to help us understand the what's called the Prasangita view of how things exist. So next week I'll give you more of a detail of these different schools of wisdom realizing emptiness. So Lama Tsongkhapa says to realize the middle way school, that's the way things exist. Neither are they existing inherently, or neither are they not existing at all. I'm just getting a message on the screen saying my connection is unstable. I hope that doesn't mean that I've stopped broadcasting or stopped streaming. I'll keep going because everything else looks normal. It says, please wait while we try reconnecting. I'll keep going. Hopefully the recording will work anyway. So the highest school of reasoning is called the Prasangika Madhyamika school, which Lama Yeshe calls the consequentialist school. The consequentialist school. That's quite a common English translation for this high school, how things exist. But to help us, or essential to understanding how that, what the reasoning is for that school, we need to understand a lower school, which is called the mind-only school. So this is very skillfully explained, the mind-only school, by Lama Zopa, Lama Yeshe. I'll refer you to the readings, which you've got, Lama Yeshe's article called Non-Duality, page 13. The article begins, this is the extract from Lama Yeshe's teaching, and page 15 of the readings, Lama Yeshe uses this example of explaining how the mind-only school reason, what it is. So he says, all relative phenomena arise and disappear like the bubbles in a glass of Coca-Cola. In the analogy, Coca-Cola corresponds to the mind itself, while the bubbles arising within it are all relative phenomena perceived by the six senses. Can the bubbles in the Coca-Cola be separated from the Coca-Cola? No. Therefore, as they are not separate, they are not dualistic, non-dualistic. When a deep understanding of this pervades our consciousness, the foundations of samsara are shaken. So these bubbles represent like these sights, sounds, tastes, senses, physical sensations, touch. But the Coca-Cola itself, the liquid, is the mind. The consequence. So the mind-only school says that the Coca-Cola itself is the mind, and the bubbles are everything we see, which don't exist inherently. They say that everything we see, including the self, has no independent existence, just like we've been arguing with the car and the previous example. But the mind-only school draws a line at that. It says there must be a mind behind all this to actually put on the labels and so on. So the mind itself, Coca-Cola itself, exists inherently. So it exists from its own side. So this, if we can understand this mind-only school, also called the Chittamatra, explained this as one of the steps towards understanding the ultimate school. It is the bridge we rely upon to cross over from a completely materialistic outlook, everything existing from its own side inherently, to the transcendent view of reality, which is beyond all extremes. Okay, so you can have a look at that when afterwards when you want to do some extra reading afterwards when you want to do some extra reading of page. Look at this article by Lama Yeshe. Your mind labels and believes I am walking. But what Lama Zopa is saying is there's nothing else happening there. The body is walking. And of course, the mental aggregates are walking with the body because the body's walking, our brain and our mind is walking along with the body. So there's the five aggregates moving in the aspect of walking, but there's nothing on top of that. That's why we say I'm walking. And then the second example he gives, we talked about last week, a newborn baby who hasn't got a name. We refer to that, we think of that collection of aggregates, the young baby's body, and we attribute that there is someone there, but they haven't got a name, so we can't actually refer to it. We refer to it as the baby. When the baby is given a name, that label fuses with the base. The base is the baby's body, and the label appears to exist from the side of the base. It seems that the baby is called, let's say the baby is called Deborah, and So as time goes on, and people refer to Deborah, whenever they see that collection, the base, the body, then it seems that Deborah and the label are the same and one, fused. Very good example, I think. Okay, so because it's 10 past 8, I think we'll just explain this meditation, which is death awareness. And we combine death awareness, the certainty of death, the uncertainty of time of death, and the only thing that will help at the time of death is our state of mind, our practice that we've done during this life, practice of compassion, calmness, and so on. So our mental state is really the only thing that helps at the time of death. So we combine the death awareness. We usually use death awareness to incentivize our practice. Lama Zopa says if we wake up we should every morning think that this could be our last day. And the reason to do that, it's not to be morbid, but to actually make the most of our time. So we bring meaning into our life, motivate whatever we're doing, no matter what it is, how mundane, that we're doing it for the benefit of others. This is the Mahayana motivation. Lama Zopa says, this makes our life meaningful. Everything we do is Dharma practice if we have this motivation of what we do. We're walking with what he called bodhicitta, which is loving kindness, compassion. We living, talking, working, eating with bodhicitta. So if we can remember that, we can actually make the most of our life. So death awareness makes us sharply aware that we have to make the most of our time. So at the end of that, we will also look at this. At the end of that, we will also look at this practice of what actually happens at the time of death. So if this is, I'm taking the material from a meditation in your collection of materials I sent you in the first class by Thupten Pende. That's his teachings on this. He's a monk, very highly realized monk, or not sure, well, very senior monk, I should say, very senior monk. And his meditation on page 70, around about 72, 73 of that transcript, and the exact page 74, where he actually takes us through the death process, what happened to the mind. The reason for this is it said that if we're calm and have a clear mind at the time of death, during the death process, we can actually use the death process to obtain enlightenment at the time of death, to realize emptiness at the time of death. So I'll briefly go through the preliminaries, which is meditation on the three: certainty of time, uncertainty of time, death. Certainly that there will be death, it's uncertainty of time, and what can help at the time of death. And then I'll just read the short exposition given by Pende of what happens at the time of death. So these great meditators have actually simulated death in their meditation, and what they do is bring the winds, which are like energy currents in the body, into the central channel. Central channel is a non-physical channel in the body where the winds can reside, and the mind is carried on the winds. So if we can bring our winds into the central channel of the body, we'll talk more about this when we do Tantra as the next module, then the mind can focus totally and calm and unravel these knots that are in the central channel. So that's what I'll do. So we'll just briefly go through the death awareness meditation, and then I'll just read you a very concise, short summary of some of the visions that happen during the death process. So if we rehearse, as long as the Dalai Lama says, he practices dying every day. So he practices the meditation on what will happen at the time of death based on the teachings given by these great meditators. And so at the time of death, it's easier and less scary, we've already experienced to some extent the process. Okay, let's do it. Okay, we'll just physically get comfortable, either sitting, lying. A few moments to focus on the breath, calm the mind. The fact that of all humans alive today, in 100 years, almost all those beings will have died. Each moment, our life becomes short, our lifespan becomes shorter, come closer to the moment of death. Uncertainty of the time of death is the second point. Although death is certain, we are not sure when it will happen. There is no guarantee we'll live a normal lifespan. Thinking of all those. Third point is that only spiritual insight, only our mind, our Dharma practice can help us at death time. A peaceful mind, a mind of compassion, unattached mind, will be the mind that helps us at the time of death. Loved ones cannot help us, our possessions cannot help us. Even our body, we have to give up at the time of death. So, with certainty of death and uncertainty of time, the fact that only our mental development can help at the time of death, we need to take care of our mind, spend what little time we have left in a meaningful way. So that we can transcend the fear of death and die peacefully. So, also to help transcend the fear of death is to contemplate the death process. So at the time of death, imagine that we are now on our deathbed, our body is shutting down. Our sight dims and eventually goes altogether. We cannot even see the back of our eyelids. The hearing grows faint until all sounds and even sounds of our body disappear. We lose our sense of taste and touch. You no longer feel weight or temperature, soft or smooth, hard or rough. Meanwhile, our thoughts are changing. As the senses grow dim and fade, our thoughts appear more clearly, like clear dreams. Images, however, appear equal, as if we've become detached, an observer. Our experience of these images becomes neutral, neither pleasant or unpleasant. You lose the ability to recognize objects. You forget their names. You even lose a sense of caring what is going on and what is the purpose. You let go of the stream of thoughts. There's no reason to hold on to them. The thoughts fade away and disappear altogether. But the darkness is not absolute. There's illumination like the night of a full moon. Be aware of this without naming or thinking about it, like the alert state of the infant. Imagine when white illumination gives way now to a red illumination, like the sky at sunset.